What does the name of a coffee mean? Well, let's start with single-serve coffee. What is single-serve coffee? The term single-origin coffee is a broad term that is often simply interpreted to mean coffee from a single producer, a single crop, or a single region of origin. A single farm or single region means that the coffee comes from the same farm, processing plant, or cooperative, and then buyers can see labels that indicate the region in which the coffee was grown, the name of a specific region or farm, or even a microregion, a specific variety on a specific farm. However, this doesn't mean that a single origin coffee is a single origin coffee. The most important thing about a single origin coffee is that it can be traced back to the source, so you know exactly where the coffee came from, and that it is a single origin coffee and not a blend. Often with higher quality single origin coffees, you can see the history of a particular estate's production, and at the same time the flavors of these coffees are as they should be, with the characteristics of a particular coffee grown in a particular region. The name of a single origin coffee contains the basic flavors and qualities of the coffee. The most common naming formula for a coffee is information such as country, region, variety, processing method, bean size, bean shape or color, amount of defects, density of raw beans, cupping quality, and so on. In order to understand the name of a coffee, you must first understand the grading and categorization of coffee. In order to distinguish the quality of coffee beans, it is necessary to classify the coffee. Generally speaking, coffee is graded according to its defect rate, bean size, hardness, altitude, and cupping grade. Understanding the grading system allows us to make a basic judgment on the quality and price of raw coffee beans. Many coffee beans have program codes behind their names, such as G1, G3, G4, AA, PB, SHB, SHG, EP and so on, which are the grading of raw coffee beans. However, up to now, there is no international quality grading system, so the name and the basis of the grading are defined by each country of origin, and different countries have different ways of grading. Different countries have different grading methods. Different countries have their own customary grading methods. However, basically, the most commonly used grading criteria are as follows. 1. Differences in the appearance of the raw coffee beans, such as size, shape, and defect ratio. 2. The environment in which the raw coffee beans are grown and its influence, such as altitude, hardness. 3. The quality of the coffee beans after roasting and cupping. Generally speaking, the grading criteria will be based on bean size, color, shape, defect ratio, altitude, hardness, variety, and taste after roasting. Grading by defect ratio. The lower the percentage of defective coffee beans, the higher the grade of the coffee beans. Generally speaking, both the producers and the stores will select the coffee beans according to their condition. For example, raw coffee beans from Ethiopia and Indonesia are graded G1, G5, and must be G1 and G2 to be washed, G3 and G4 to be sun-dried, and G4 to be used for commercial purposes. The meaning and rules of the name of Ethiopian coffee beans: Ethiopia Yurga Kefi G5, country plus region plus grading UGQ equal usual good quality. Common abbreviations used in the export of raw coffee beans from Indonesia are: type, R equal Robusta, A equal Arabica, processing, WP equal wet processed, DP equal dry processed, AP equal after polished, polished to remove the silver skin, hand-picked for defects. Bean grade classification: D/P, double picked, T/P, triple pick. Robusta washed Robusta is divided into EK1, Dutch, Eerste Kwaliteit Primary, GB, Dutch, Chwan Bereiding Simplified Standard, OIB, Dutch, Oost Indisk Bereiding, Dutch, Oost Indisk Bereiding, WIB, Dutch, West Indisk Bereiding. The meaning and rules of the names of raw coffee beans in Indonesia: Indonesia WIB, Indonesia G1, country plus grading name, and WIB is the most common and also the highest standard. Vietnam G2 standard polished, country plus classification name. Grading according to bean size. That is, the size of the coffee beans. Colombia is the larger the better as a standard. Grading by mesh, 18 mesh or more, about 0.7 centimeters. For Supremo, the following Excelso. Mesh represents the diameter of the coffee beans. A mesh is 1/64 inch, 1 inch equal 25.4 mm. Kenya's grading is based on the size of the body of the coffee beans as the main, the quality of the cup and the weight of the coffee beans as a supplement. Therefore, we often hear about Kenya AA, with AA+, being the best grade, followed by AB, 15 to 16 mesh, which accounts for most of the production, and so on. There is also PB, which means peaberry, which is categorized by its appearance. The meaning and rules of the names of Colombian raw coffee beans: Colombia Huila Supremo SC 17/18 FNC, country plus region plus classification plus other FNC equal Federación Nacional de Cafeteros de Colombia. The meaning and rules of the classic Kenyan raw coffee bean names: Kenya AAFAQ, country plus grading plus cupping quality. Kenya also has 10 cupping grades: fine, good, fair to good, fair to average quality, FAQ, fair, poor to fair, finally poor, of which FAQ is the most common. Tanzania AAFAQ, country plus grading name plus others. Plantations and large estates in Papua New Guinea account for 25% of the country's production. Small and medium-sized farms, holdings or blocks, of 10 to 20 hectares account for 10%. There are 76 registered plantations and estates in PNG. The meaning and rules of the Papua New Guinea coffee bean names: PNG plantation Y, country plus type of plantation plus classification name. Grading by altitude and hardness. Honduras is divided into SHG, strictly high-grown, above 1,200 meters, SG, high-grown, above 1,000 meters, and SC, central standard, above 600 meters according to the altitude. Basically, the higher the altitude where the coffee trees grow, the harder the coffee beans will be. This is because factors such as low temperature, short sunshine, and high humidity will make the coffee grow slower and produce denser fruits, which will give the coffee beans a more saturated flavor in various aspects, such as acidity and sweetness. In short, altitude has a great impact on the quality of coffee beans. USP US preparation, EP Euro preparation, GP gourmet preparation. Many countries have USP, EP, and GP standards, with USP/EP being the most common. The European and US standards are specific requirements for raw coffee beans in terms of defects or bean size, and sometimes there are other standards as well, with the EP standard being generally higher than the USP standard. Honduras SHG EP, country plus elevation plus defects standard. Costa Rica Terrazzo SHB EP red honey, country plus region plus grading plus processing. Guatemala is also graded by altitude: strictly hard bean, SHB, above 1600 meters, fancy hard bean above 1500 meters, hard bean, HB, above 1200 meters, semi-hard bean, SH, above 1100 meters, extra prime, EP, above 900 meters, prime honey, EP, above 800 meters. Prime washed above 800 meters, extra good washed above 700 meters, good washed below 700 meters. Guatemala SHB EP Huehue Tenango, country plus elevation plus classification plus region. The meaning and rules of the name of the raw beans of El Salvador: El Salvador SHG EP, country plus grading plus defect standard. Grading according to cupping quality. Although Brazil is one of the largest coffee-producing countries in the world, among the coffee-producing countries in Central and South America, Brazil's production altitude is on the low side. Moreover, the terrain is flat, with few shade trees, and lack of microclimate, so the coffee beans produced are soft, commonly known as soft beans, and the taste is smoother than that of other coffee-producing regions. Therefore, in addition to grading by defect rate type 2 to 6 and by bean size New York 2 New York 4/5, Brazil also uses the cupping quality level to grade strictly soft, Rio Zona. Clever Brazilians have switched to taste, and since 1999, the Cup of Excellence has been held to evaluate Brazilian coffees on the basis of their mildness and smoothness with low acidity, fullness, and sweetness, as well as the overall presentation of nutty and cacao-like flavors. The sweetness, purity, and smoothness of the aftertaste are the representative characteristics of Brazilian quality coffee. Through the above grading, we can well understand the meaning and rules of the Brazilian coffee bean names: Brazil, Santos, New York, 2FC, country plus region, port, plus grading name plus cupping quality. Brazilian cupping quality grades are: fine cup, fine, good cup, fair cup, poor cup, bad cup, with FC, fine cup, and GC, good cup, being the most common. In most production areas, the size of the coffee beans is the main basis for grading. In other words, the bigger the beans, the more powerful. In fact, it is not difficult to deduce, because the higher the altitude where the coffee tree grows, the lower the temperature, the shorter the sunshine, and the more time it takes for the fruit to ripen, so it will grow slower and denser, and of course, it will be harder, and of course, it will have a better flavor performance. Although the size of the coffee bean affects the flavor of the coffee to a certain extent, it is not absolute. Grading is only a reference, but there are a few points that we can pay special attention to. 1. The grading names are similar, but the definition of the defect rate is actually very different. 2. The growing conditions of coffee beans are different, so it is impossible to compare, and the characteristics of raw beans are different in different producing countries. 3. Although grading is an important consideration, it is not the main factor affecting flavor. The grading system is not the most important factor that affects the flavor. Its advantage is that it facilitates a more even heating of the coffee beans during roasting. The other major factor that affects flavor is the degree of roasting. What exactly is roast level? In fact, the way a coffee is roasted greatly affects its flavor and aroma. There are 3 levels of roasting according to color: light, medium, and dark. Light roast. Coffee is usually light brown or flaxen in color, with no oils on the surface because it is not roasted long enough for the oils to be released. Light roasting usually ends at the beginning of the first blast stage of the coffee bean. The burst is the popping sound that coffee makes when the temperature reaches about 205 degrees Celsius. With the collection of heat, the coffee bean body will continue to expand. The accumulation of heat will make the beans inside the water evaporation, the formation of water vapor. In the trend of internal pressure, the beans will eventually burst. Lightly roasted coffees usually have a delicate flavor with a pleasant acidity that reflects the characteristics of the country of origin better than darker roasted coffees. Lightly roasted coffees are usually pure and bright, with delicate floral and fruity aromas, good acidity, and a lighter mouthfeel. While light roasted coffees are more likely to bring out the full flavor of the coffee, there is a risk that they may be under-roasted. There are many names for light roasted coffees. The following are the most common: Light City/Half City, Cinnamon, Blonde, New England, etc. Medium roast. Due to the higher temperature and longer roasting time, the color of medium roasted coffee is a little darker than light roasted coffee, but the surface is still free of oils. Medium roasted coffees have a more rounded appearance, which is a sign that the beans are beginning to mature after the first blast. After the first roast, the coffee will be close to the second roast. The original flavor and brightness of the coffee is complemented by a fuller mouthfeel and a better balance of acidity and texture. Medium roasted coffees have a better balance of acidity, sweetness, and mouthfeel, and the increased caramelization reaction creates a deeper fruity flavor, as well as a chocolatey and nutty taste. Some experts believe that medium roasted coffees add sweetness while avoiding the risk of under-roasting. Here are some common names for medium roasted coffees: American, breakfast/after dinner, City Plus, Full City, and so on. Dark roast. Coffee can range in color from dark brown to charcoal black, and the darker the roast, the more oils are on the surface. This is due to the fact that the coffee undergoes a second roasting, at a temperature of around 230 degrees Celsius. This is a very dark roast, with almost all of the oils on the surface of the coffee. Coffee roasted at this level loses almost all of its moisture and is therefore less dense and less complex in flavor, with the main flavor coming from the roasting process itself, which means the coffee loses subtle flavor characteristics, has less acidity, and has a thicker mouthfeel. A dark roast retains very little of the coffee's own flavor, with most of the flavor coming from the roasting, and has an acidity and sweetness similar to dark chocolate, sometimes with a smoky, bitter taste reminiscent of spice. Common names for dark roasted coffees include Viennese, New Orleans, French, Italian, and Neapolitan/Spanish. Some people believe that darker roasted coffees have a higher caffeine content, but in fact lighter roasted coffees have a higher density of caffeine per unit. Since lighter roasted coffees are a bit heavier, the difference in final caffeine content between the two coffees is actually not that great. The choice of roasting level is entirely up to personal preference. Everyone's judgment of taste is subjective, so there is no right or wrong roast, and the important thing is to provide customers with as many choices as possible. Professionals usually prefer lighter roasts, while the average customer prefers something a little more mature. For example, medium roasts are usually the best sellers. While there is no such thing as the best, ultra-dark roasted coffees do not have a good reputation in the boutique coffee world because they are so bitter that the flavor of the roast completely overpowers the natural flavors of the origin, the bean type, or the processing of the raw beans, and the flavor of the coffee is affected by extraction parameters, grinding parameters, and the water temperature, among other things. The degree of roasting affects the flavor of the coffee, but not all coffees with the same degree of roasting will taste the same, taking into account the place of origin, the altitude of the planting, the bean variety, the density of the planting, the water activity, the water content, and the processing of the raw beans, etc. Even the temperature and humidity of the environment affect the flavor of the coffee. The flavor of coffee is closely related to the bean variety, bean processing techniques, and roasting style. For example, different bean processing techniques can change the chemical structure of the beans. Of course, the way of roasting can also change the flavor of the coffee. For example, a slower and gentler roasting will retain the sweetness of the coffee, while a faster roasting will retain the acidity. From a distance, the chocolate and nutty flavors of Latin American coffees are partly due to longer roasting times and higher-end roasting temperatures compared to fruity, more floral African coffees. It is clear that the name of the roast does not tell us all about the flavor of the coffee, and we need to consider it together with other factors. On the other hand, the way the coffee is brewed can also greatly affect the flavor. As dark roasted coffees are roasted for a long time at high temperatures, they become more soluble, more porous, and less dense, which affects the extraction of the coffee because different components are extracted at different rates. For example, fruity acidity is extracted at first, then sweetness, and finally bitterness and astringency. Regardless of the degree of roasting, under-extraction will make the coffee sour, lose sweetness, lack bitterness and balance. Over-extraction will make the coffee too bitter, and the sweetness and sourness will not be realized. Proper brewing should be able to balance the various flavors of the coffee. For example, a dark roasted coffee is already very bitter, so consider a coarser grind and lower water temperature to slow down the extraction rate, and also consider the extraction time. In fact, there is no roasting program is the most perfect, because the flavor of the coffee is absolutely according to personal preference. Feel good is more important than anything else. Drinking coffee is a way of life. Enjoy their favorite flavor is their own life.